So now this is module 4 or session 4 of this Foundations of Mindfulness program. So this far, for the first part of this program, we've been looking into the cultivation of mindfulness, or shamatha in Buddhist terms. So really this ability of focused attention, non-distractedness. And this is the first 3 sessions. We've also been using the body, or more specifically the breathing. That has been our object of focus. So the first session we cultivated awareness of full body breathing. So this is was then connected to the mental quality of relaxation. So we really use this full body breath awareness to cultivate the ability of relaxing, letting go, and having that as a foundation for the focus practice. And then in the second session, we narrowed the focus a little bit, and we also let it sink down in the body. So we observed the breathing in the belly, and we talked about cultivating the mental ability of stability or focus, non-distractedness. And then last time we looked into clarity, so cultivating more of a high definition awareness. And we used specifically then the tip of the nose, the nostrils, as the object, because that's a slightly more subtle object, and it's a way of really cultivating clarity when we focus on something that is a bit more subtle. So that's been the first 3 sessions. And we had this analogy of cultivating like a tree, where the roots of the tree is relaxation, and the foundation of mindfulness is really this ability of being loose and relaxed, so we don't tense. So those are the roots that go deep and create this stable foundation for then the trunk, which is the aspect of focus or stability based on the relaxation. And then on top of that, we have the branches, the leaves of mental clarity, which is based on then this focus and stability. So there's been kind of a progression so far. And then for this session and the next session, we will shift focus from the breathing, and we will turn towards our own mind. So now we will still be doing shamatha practice or focus practice, but the object will now be our own minds. And specifically today, it will be our own thoughts and mental processes. And then the next session, we will the object of focus will be awareness itself, the bare fact of being aware. And this will then be a bridge into the last 2 sessions, which is the application of mindfulness. So now we're cultivating mindfulness, and at the end we will apply it, and looking into then the nature of our experience. We will look into change. We will look into dissatisfaction, or really how mental afflictions is really the cause of the problems that we experience. And then the last session we'll actually look into the nature of ourselves as a person, and to discover the interconnected nature of how we exist, how we are not this separate, concrete little me that we need to protect, but rather we're really this part of the flow of interconnectedness of life. So that will be then applying the skill of mindfulness to gain insight and wisdom. And in general, it's so when we cultivate focus or shamatha, or the stability of you can have many different objects, And obviously it's a skill that you then can use in everyday life, whether I'm talking to someone or performing some task. I can do that with more focus and more ease and more clarity. But for many people, the breath is really a good object. And if you look at in the old meditation text, it says that the breath is really recommended for people that have discursive minds and a lot of thoughts. So I think back then that was a small portion of the population, and today it's all of us, because we're all plagued by this obsessive compulsive thinking mind. So I think specifically for us, it's really good to have the breath. But then another that is very common, specifically or especially in the Buddhist tradition, is a visualized image. So traditionally you would maybe visualize the image of the Buddha, or you could just visualize a light or something, but you have an internal visualization as the object. And I think for many of us that's quite difficult. I don't know if any of you are skilled in visualization. Sometimes you can find that, like architects or artists, they have a better ability of visualizing, but it can be quite tricky. You can also use anything basically. You can have a physical object. You can just put a rock or a pebble or anything and just focus on that, and that can be that's a very coarse object. So it's you can't go very far with that type of object, but in the beginning it can be very good. It can also be like a sound, or anything that you use as the object. But that's pretty coarse. So the breath is slightly more subtle, and then the fourth one is then the mind. So using really the mind itself as the object of focus. And it's recommended. There are specifically some Buddhist traditions where this is recommended, like Dzogchen tradition, Mahamudra tradition, and it can be a bit more challenging than even the breath, because it gets even more subtle, and it's also more fluid. There's more movement in the mind than it is in the breath. So it can be tricky at first, but we'll give it a try today. So when we use the mind as the object of attention, what are we actually paying attention to? Well, we're just paying attention to all the mental processes. So thoughts and memories and emotions and all the things that are constantly there in the mind. But we're trying to be an impartial observer, so not getting caught up in or pulled away by thoughts, but really maintaining a position of like a impartial, curious observer. You can think of it like you have your own mental laboratory, and you're the scientist, and now you're gonna figure out what's going on in there. And I think especially in modern society, this is extremely useful, because there is so much stimulus all the time, so much information, so much that are constantly triggering our minds. We have extremely active minds, I would say overactive minds. And we have, throughout life, we have developed these habits of really following thoughts. We get caught up in the stories that our thoughts tell us, and we keep feeding into this habit of just thinking. It's like this is not a psychological diagnosis, but if there was one, you could call it obsessive compulsive thinking, like OCT, if there was such a thing. But so also how we relate to this then, especially if many of these thoughts might be negative. So there might be worries or painful memories and just all these things, and we don't know how to deal with them. We haven't been taught how to deal with our own thoughts and emotions. So we try to do basically one or two things. We try to just ignore them, or we try to suppress them. And just trying to push away thoughts or emotions is not a very good solution. It doesn't work long time. They will just pop back up eventually, and it creates all sorts of psychological problems. You're just trying to suppress thoughts, emotions, feelings. And I think also many of the physical problems that we experience, we have pain in our backs and all sorts of things, comes through us trying to control our thoughts and really force them to go away, and so on. And then we also end up projecting onto others the things that we're not really aware of, because we're trying to push it away. So this way we become slaves of our own minds. We get this sense of being constantly overwhelmed by thoughts and difficult emotions, and we're tormented by our own minds. I don't know if you can recognize yourself in that kind of description, but for most of us, the mind seems to give us a hard time. So the benefits of starting to do this practice, where we just observe the thoughts, the emotions, the sensations that are happening, it's that we can stop getting caught up in these thoughts. So we make the thoughts into an object that we can observe, and what we realize then is that a thought is basically nothing. It's like it's like a mental hologram. It has no power over us unless we give it that power. So if we cultivate this ability of not feeding into the thought, not identifying with the thought, and not giving the thought so much importance, but cultivating that kind of like a distance, like being a witness of or an observer instead of just being caught up, then we might notice that if we leave the thoughts alone, they kind of lose their energy, and the mind settles on its own. So we don't have to force the mind to be calm or clear. We can't anyways, it's impossible. But just by becoming an observer, we might find that the mind settles down on its own. So there's a metaphor, if you have a glass of water and it's full of dirt, and then you have a spoon and you try to fix it, you want it to go away and you want to clear up the water, and the more you do that, the messier it gets. But if you just put down that spoon, sit back and relax and just watch the glass, and then all that sediment and dirt will just settle to the bottom and you'll have this clear, nice water. So that's an analogy for this type of meditation. And also, when we don't suppress thoughts, we don't force them to go away, we just watch them, then we can also start to heal the mind. Because what happens is that we become aware of more of the stuff that's happening in our mind, the things that are just below the threshold of what we are consciously aware of. So that can trickle up, and then we can deal with things that we might have, like the habits or the things that we're not so comfortable with. They can just come into the light, and then they kind of lose the power over us. So that's also a huge benefit. So then we can become, masters of our mind, and not be controlled by it, not be overwhelmed by thoughts, not be kidnapped by thoughts all the time. So then the thoughts lose this ability to harm us or inflict pain upon us. And also when we do this, then it becomes a bridge into, like I said before, into the Vipassana or insight practice, where we then can start to look into how things really exist and what is actually the nature of our mind, what is the nature of the situation we find ourselves in. For example, becoming more aware of impermanence, how everything changes all the time, so we stop fighting against the flow of things, the flow of life, and really start to use impermanence to our advantage instead of just fighting against it, for example. Okay, so the practice we'll be doing today is, like I said, it's still shamatha practice, but now the object becomes our mind and whatever arises in the mind in terms of thoughts, emotions, memories, mental images. You'll find there's plenty to look at. You won't be bored. And it's not sense objects. It's not necessarily sounds or physical sensations, but rather mental events, and that makes the focus slightly narrower, and so it's not the sense objects, it is the mental objects. And then the idea of doing this practice is, of course, that we can also expand this into daily life, so that we can become better at just observing the thoughts and sensations, mental images throughout the days, again, not being so caught up with them. And the critical, so there's one critical instruction, and that is to observe without grasping and without distraction. So when the thoughts arise, we don't grasp onto them, we don't identify with them, we don't follow them. We just simply watch them. They will arise, and then they will fall away. And the interesting thing is, the things that when we were focusing on the breathing, the thoughts and so on we regarded them as distractions, so we let them go and we came back to the breathing. So here the distractions now become the object of attention in a way. So the thoughts that we just let them go and came back with our focus. Now we just allow them to be there. But there's still the possibility of becoming distracted. So distracted here means that we get pulled away, so we lose awareness. So we want to maintain aware and focused, but without grasping. So again, just like with the breath practice, you will become distracted, and thoughts will carry you away. So just like before, if we realize that I'm distracted, again, we just relax. We return our attention to this position of being the observer, and then we just carry on. And one instruction there, and I'll give it when I do the guided meditation as well. So one instruction there is that if you're unsure where to look, so to speak, what am I observing, then you can just you can generate a thought, any thought, like maybe the thought, what is the mind, say. So you generate that thought and you watch it. You consciously generate a thought and you observe it without, don't get caught in the the philosophical notion of what is the mind, but just that, what is the mind, that thought. You just observe it and it goes away, and then you keep looking in the space where that thought appeared, and then you just wait for the next thought to appear in that space. So what you're watching is the space of the mind and anything that arises in that space. And if you haven't done this before, it might be unclear where to look, but you'll get the hang of it with practice. Then also in this practice, it's really good to do it with your eyes open. So I think many of us are very conditioned in having our eyes closed when we meditate, but especially when we do this practice, it's really good to have our eyes open and just let the gaze be vacant, so we don't focus on anything particular. We just allow the gaze to be open, and the benefit of not having the eyes closed is that, first of all, it grounds us in the present moment. It also brings some more clarity. It's when we close our eyes, there's the tendency of becoming sometimes more dull. But then also it's an extremely good bridge into daily life, because in daily life, most of the time we don't walk around with our eyes closed. We have our eyes open. So if we want to cultivate the ability of really observing our mind throughout daily life, it's good to train ourselves in doing it with our eyes open. So that becomes a bridge into daily life. And then one final point before going into meditation is that if you find that you get constantly carried away, constantly kidnapped by thoughts, then just like when we're doing the breathing meditation or observing the breath, then we could use the counting. So breathing in, breathing out, and then we count the breaths as a way of noticing when we're distracted, and as a way of helping us to remain focused. So here instead, we don't use the counting, like 1 thought, 2 thoughts, I don't know, never tried that. Maybe I should, it's an interesting experiment. But we don't count thoughts or mental experiences, but rather we can label them. So as a way of maintaining that position of the observer, we can just put little labels on whatever arises. So thought, or maybe it could be like frustration or memory. So when we do, we just, don't make it too complicated, because then you start telling stories about things, but just like a little tag that you put on whatever is going on. And that, in a way, that makes it into an object. It objectifies it, so you can have that position of observing it. And also if it's, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing here, this is very confusing, then you can always go back to the breathing. So that's a very concrete, stable thing to focus on. So go there, spend some time until you feel that I'm a bit more grounded, a bit more, my focus is a bit more stable, and then you can let the breathing go and continue observing the mind again. So those are the instructions. Are there any questions or comments before we try to go into meditation and try this out? Does it seem crystal clear? That's very unlikely, but yeah, I'm happy. Okay, so like before, we'll do 24 minutes, and I will be guiding you through it. And again, like always, it's perfectly okay. You can sit on a cushion, sit on a chair. You can lie down. These are all very good positions for meditation. Just one little note: when you lie down, you might want to. This is like a Buddhist etiquette thing, so you might want to face or point the feet away from, like, statues and stuff. Okay. So you can start by just allowing your attention, first of all, just drop down into the body so that we can make sure that our body is relaxed. You can just scan through the body, maybe using the out breath to release any tension that you experience. Letting the shoulders drop, relaxing in the chest and abdomen. Maybe paying attention to your face to see if you hold any tension, maybe in the muscles around the eyes, the jaws. And really release that tension and drop into relaxation. Allowing the breathing to find its natural rhythm. Just allowing the body to settle. And also allowing the mind to settle, so not dwelling in the past and not projecting into the future, letting go of thoughts and plans and concerns. And also allowing yourself to drop all expectations, all expectations on the outcomes of this meditation. You can allow your eyes to be open or half open. Letting your gaze be directed slightly down towards the floor, but with an open, vacant gaze, not grasping onto anything in the visual field. And then with curiosity and a warm and kind attitude, you turn your attention to your own mind, to the space of the mind where thoughts and memories, images, desires, emotions, where all those things appear. Becoming a neutral observer of whatever arises in your mind. And if you're not sure where to place your attention, then you can generate a thought, just any thought, and watch it arise in the mind, and watch it dissolve back into the mind. And then you just keep watching that space and just see what comes up next. And if you notice that you become distracted, kidnapped by thoughts, then, like before, just relax, release that distraction, and just return your attention. Coming back to that position of observing your own mind. And if you find that you become a bit confused, it's difficult to um, remain undistracted, you can, for a while, you can go back to the breathing if you like, to stabilize your attention. Using the breath to anchor your attention, and then when you feel ready, you can let go of the breath and then turn your attention back to the mind again. Also, if you feel that you get caught up and carried away, you might want to experiment with the noting or the labeling. So whenever a mental event arises, you just place a little label upon it, like thought, mental image, emotion. And even if you feel that you're frustrated or bored, you can just observe that frustration or that boredom. It's just a mental event. It has no power to harm you. Just observe. now, coming towards the end of the practice, see if you can just release all appearances of the mind, just letting the mind come to rest, not doing anything at all, just being present and resting in the stillness of awareness.